Robert, I've been interested in the relationship between science and religion all my intellectual life. I've met and have many friends who are scientists who are very vigorously against any attempt for consonance or relationships between the two. They think it's a very polluting endeavor, and many people on the other side, of course, scientists and people in theology, who thinks that there's great consonance and you can appreciate the world. What I'd like to do from your perspective is you've worked in so many areas of philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, moral theory, epistemology, certainly. What can philosophy and a philosophical way of thinking, how can that affect this conflict or consonance between science and religion?
Philosophy, I think, is a meta-discipline, the paradigmatic meta-discipline. It concerns, in part, the nature of other disciplines, the kind of question they ask, the standards of evidence they use, the sorts of hypotheses they attempt to test, the view of the world, if they present one, that they offer. Now, philosophy of science is a well-established field. Philosophy of religion concerns both theology and religion as practiced. Now, as I see it, science is not mainly, if at all, metaphysical. I don't think, for example, that the existence of God is a scientific issue, though scientific data can figure in arguments for the existence of God. But I think scientists, qua scientists, are not concerned with the metaphysical question of whether there is a creator, whether there is a being matching the being of perfect being, theology. And so, as I see it, science can take theology to be a very different discipline and can, some of the time, engage in work in that discipline. Theologians, I think, may sometimes want to make claims about the empirical world, and certainly religious people will make claims that have a scientific character, sometimes about human origins. But I don't see that religion is intrinsically committed to making scientific claims, as opposed to claims about ordinary life, including moral claims about how we ought to conduct ourselves. So as I see it, there is compatibility between the two disciplines, nor is it impossible for a person to pursue both in different phases of life. Do you see any basis of incompatibility here?
I do potentially, in terms of a religious view, if there were no God, would be more than a waste of time. It would be subversive in terms of the extent of where science can go. Some people have made sociological claims that religion has held back science. I don't care about any of those things.
I wonder why you feel one needs to say that. I would rather say that for a religious person, the pursuit of science can be a pursuit of the structure of the world God has created. So it can actually involve a kind of reverence for both God and nature without slackening in empirical rigor.
I totally agree with that. I preface it by saying, if there were no God.
Well, but a religious person could say, if there were no God, I'd be missing something in my worldview, but nature could still be autonomous in terms of causal connections, and laws of nature could still obtain. Only some religions and theologies hold that nature wouldn't be orderly if God didn't keep it orderly. That's not a view that in general theologians or religious people are committed to.
Well, if you look at God as the sustainer, as more than the creator, which many religions do, then you are left with that if God were taken away, everything would disappear. It wasn't a deist approach that God is the creator and created it, and now it has this independent existence, but God is more the sustainer than the creator. May have been the creator too, but many religions claim, or aspects of Christianity in Christian philosophy, that God is more a sustainer than a creator. And
suppose one thought that. Suppose one thought that without God there wouldn't be a world.
Right.
One might then think that we'd have no world to study scientifically without God, but one could still think that the world can be studied scientifically without going through theology or scripture. One studies it scientifically.
Sure.
And if somebody who thinks God is sustainer were to be convinced that God doesn't exist, but find the world still around, it seems to me that person could go on doing science.
I totally agree with that. Some scientists tell me that religious people have to listen to me, but I don't have to listen to them. Do you agree with that?
Well, if you're talking about, say, climate change, then I think religious people, as rational citizens, should listen to scientific judgments about what we need to do to live up to the very standards of human existence religious people endorse. So sure. Now, do scientists have to listen to religious people? Well, courteously as fellow citizens, they don't have to agree. But if you're bringing out that there's a certain sense in which natural reason, given by God, if you like, but as something we all possess, forces us to take scientific claims seriously, you're right, it does. Whereas natural reason only in some lives forces a theological take on the universe.
Right, and this is very important because in all the science-religion dialogues, if from the standpoint of the believer, be it the believer being the scientist or the philosopher or theologian, so whoever is the believer believes that there's this common relationship between them. But I think at best the relationship is very asymmetric. It's not a symmetrical relationship between science and religion from an epistemological point of view. In other words, the epistemology of asserting beliefs and knowledge in science and religion are very different.
I can agree on asymmetry, but remember the domains are different. So you can grant the asymmetry and grant that everybody should listen to scientific claims about public health and still say that the question of God's existence is not a scientific question, and it can be pursued without going through science, just as science can be pursued without going through theology. There you have a certain symmetry. You have certain independence.
So address that further in terms of the core concepts of epistemology, belief, knowledge, justification from science and religion.
Knowledge of the natural world is based on observations of the natural world, studies, generalizations, testing. Mm-hmm. Knowledge of God would have a different basis, even if there are some natural facts that go into the reasoning that leads people to believe in God. Mm. So there really are two areas here, and certainly science is autonomous relative to studying nature.
That's knowledge. What about belief?
Well, belief doesn't have to be knowledge, and there are ways of arriving at rational theistic beliefs that make use of scientific data. Some people arrive at those beliefs without using scientific data. There's a lot of controversy about just how scientific and empirical data generally bear, and religious experience comes in as something in some lives and not others. Mm. But it seems to me that science doesn't have to lead people to speculate theologically, but it may very naturally do so. And some people are inspired to study nature in part by the thought that it's created and given to us to study, to admire, not just to manipulate, to preserve as well. Stewardship, that is a theme, as you know, in much religion. The
concept of belief, we use the term much stronger in religion than we do in science, that the bonding between belief and knowledge in science is very clear how you do that. You have the scientific method, you have falsification, you have ways of discerning between belief and hypothesis and when that becomes knowledge or eliminated. You don't have that same thing in religion. It seems to be quite different.
Well, I think religious thinking has standards of evidence. Not just anything goes in theology or in religious discourse. So there's still a distinction between mere belief and belief justified by evidences of the appropriate kind. But the evidences are different on the two sides. I thought you were going to get at the point that some scientists like to work with probabilities, and the only belief is to the effect that a hypothesis has a certain probability. The hypothesis is not believed flat out, whereas in religious contexts, things are believed flat out. Though I'm always stressing that one could be religiously committed where one has faith that God is sovereign, even if one doesn't have belief. One couldn't have disbelief in faith, but faith does not entail belief, as opposed to a level of trust that needn't involve belief of the same proposition. It's stronger than hope, but less than unqualified belief.